My name is Lara Gerassi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an associate professor at the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think in some ways my research actually, the core of my research or the way in which I approach my research has stayed pretty constant. I came in as a community engaged scholar, meaning that I work with communities and organizations to do the research that I do. I came in as practicing or having had practice experience as a licensed clinical social worker and really drawing on that experience. And I think those two things really have stayed constant throughout my research. The things that have changed are when I came to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I didn't know very much about Wisconsin at all. I had built a lot of relationships in St. Louis where I did my PhD, but was really starting over. And so it has been a joy and a privilege to get to know our state, as complex as it is, and with the incredible providers who are doing the work every day on the ground. It's been really amazing. And I think a lot here about the Wisconsin idea and this idea of this two-way knowledge transfer from the university to the community and from the community to the university. And that's just been such a wonderful fit with who I am as a scholar. The second thing that I think has really changed in sort of developmentally over the course of my career, and then also thinking a little bit about COVID, is taking those community engaged principles, the core of how I do my work, and trying to figure out how to translate that into more national partnerships to make a more national impact with the work that I do. And so a silver lining of the COVID was that people moved to Zoom much more easily, and I was able to really build rapport and build relationships with folks across the country. And so I feel really incredibly grateful from the support, resources, training that I've had pre-tenure to be able to launch that phase of my career. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that continues as we go on. My work broadly really aims to inform practices and policies that support people who provide some type of sexual act for some type of compensation, financial usually. And so this can be anything from folks who experience sex trafficking to folks who are trading sex for basic needs or to survive, to folks who might provide those sex acts or identify as sex workers for other reasons. In my work, I really try to be inclusive of all of that complexity and not just one particular subset of those folks. So where I'm really excited for us to go is two different ways. One is when we talk about people who trade sex for financial compensation, we really don't talk about some groups of people, including folks who are at college or university as undergraduate or graduate students. And yet the work that my team, along with lots of other folks, have been doing, lots of other folks working with me on my team to do, has been really to uncover the experiences of students who are trading sex for compensation for a variety of different reasons. Some of which, a lot of this is because we live in a capitalistic society, and of course we need money or resources to survive. And so I am really excited about this line of work because I think the goal of it is really to support students so they can achieve their goals, whatever that might be. And our students work really, really hard to do and accomplish the things that they're doing. And so whatever I can do to support students, some of whom are trading sex, some of whom want to, some of whom don't want to, and some of whom have complex relationships, whatever I can do to support them is something that's really exciting to me about my work. The second thing that excites me is I think some of the ways that in surveys we ask questions about trading sex for compensation are super limited. We're not really capturing that complexity that I talked about earlier, and the complexity being all of these different types of sex trades. And so my team has been doing a lot of work and thinking about sort of creating more of a national impact to understand what does trading sex for compensation look like on the ground, and how can we best support people to give them choices and options for them to do whatever it is that they want to do that is best for themselves. So I love this question because you think about it for years and years, and it takes up so much time in some ways. But while it's taking up some time and mental energy, you then just do your work. And you figure out who you are as a scholar, and you keep figuring out who you are as a scholar and as a teacher. And somehow those two things meld together. So I think the biggest surprise for me about getting tenure is that the work just continued. And that is not to say that it is not an incredible milestone that was worthy of many celebrations. As PhD students can tell you, who I talk to frequently, I am a big proponent of celebrating all the milestones. And so I celebrated with friends, with family, with colleagues, and it was truly joyful. And the next morning, after I found out, I got up in the morning, went to work. I taught a 3-hour class where we talked about privilege, oppression, and power in sort of the classroom and in social work practice. And I, that afternoon, had a meeting about my research. And so I want to hold both of those things. It was surprising to me that the work just continued, and it was also surprising. It was less surprising to me how much of a relief it was, but how much I could hold the joy and celebration of this milestone with just continuing the work. So I recognize that with tenure comes security and power in a way that not all of my colleagues who work just as hard as I do get. I'm really privileged to be at a school where our staff and faculty work really hard, and some of us are tenure track and then tenured eventually, and some of us have lots of different roles that make our school run. And so I think about the responsibility that I have with this new role of trying to support the work that all of my colleagues do at the school. I also think about this in terms of my students and mentorship and the support that I give them. And in some ways that doesn't change, right? I think I will continue to do what I've done. But in some ways that does change because the power changes and the power dynamics change. And so I think about just what an incredible responsibility, in addition to something, I worked really hard for this, and there were so many factors that went into this system being structured the way that it is. So in terms of teaching, I think about just how to support students across different levels, PhD students, master's students, undergraduate students, how some of those conversations look and what rooms I'm now in a different way than or will be in a different way than I was previously. For research, I think about how my research has progressively moved to trying to center more and more folks who have the lived experiences of the thing that I'm studying. And with increased power, I hope to have increased avenues to be able to center them. I love working with students. It's just such a joy of the job that I have. So there's so many examples I can think of, but I'll just name a couple. First is actually long after they graduate. I am so privileged because my students, and I'm looking at a series of cards next to me, many of whom are written from students who write to me sometimes when they graduate, but often after they're 1 year, 3 year, 5 years out, and to tell me, hey, I came across this really difficult situation in practice and I thought of your class. Or, hey, I think you'd really be proud of me because I had this really difficult conversation with the client about some things that they were doing, and I had your voice in my head. I'm gonna get teary thinking about this. And last example that I can think of is a student who wrote a letter for me who talked about how in my class, she, as a Latina, formerly undocumented person, felt seen and included and valued. And those are just some of the most joyful experiences as an instructor that I could ever have. The second thing that comes to mind is working with PhD students. It's a very close relationship. We're together for years, working on different projects and then working on their own research. I've been really privileged to work with some really phenomenal graduate students, or PhD students in this case, and seeing how they, as scholars and as teachers, evolve over time is just such a joy. I think for students who are considering this pathway for themselves, and I think for some of my pre-tenure colleagues, I always sort of equate this journey to a marathon, not a sprint. And so with that, thinking about ways to sustain joy, to sustain love of the work, to sustain life outside of the work. I became a parent of 2 kids while I was on this journey, and I think something that has been so important for me throughout this time, and that has been really important for in many conversations I've had since with colleagues and students, and lots of folks, is how do we celebrate this work, and how do we celebrate ourselves outside of the work? How do we do things that bring us fulfillment, that are within the work that we do, and outside of the work that we do. And then the last thing I'll say is a consistent conversation that I have with folks, with students who are at various levels of their career, is what change do you want to create within the system, and what change do you want to create against the system, and what portions of your pie do you want each of those to be? And I think it looks different for all of us, and I love supporting folks in figuring that balance out for themselves. And I think as social workers and as social work practitioners and researchers, we need to remember that we need both, and thinking about how we can work together and how folks learning can create their teams and build their careers such that they can do a fulfilling balance for themselves, I think is incredibly important.